In 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt walked across a low hill in southeastern Turkey. Local farmers had been ploughing over it for generations. Schmidt saw worked flint scattered across the surface and knew it was not Roman. He began digging near the town of Sanliurfa and within days struck massive limestone pillars standing upright in the earth. The pillars were 12,000 years old, older than Stonehenge by 6,000 years, and the pyramids of Giza by 7,000, built by people with no metal tools, no pottery, no wheel, and no writing. But the discovery that still unsettles researchers is not what was built on that hill. It is the fact that someone buried it, deliberately, completely, and walked away. 5 things were sealed under that ridge. The second one still hums. The site is called Göbekli Tepe. It sits on a limestone ridge overlooking the Harran Plain in the Sanliurfa province of southeastern Turkey. The ridge itself is unremarkable from a distance. Dry grass, scattered rock, a gentle slope that gives no indication of what lies beneath. But beneath that slope, Klaus Schmidt and his team from the German Archaeological Institute found something that did not belong in the Stone Age. They found architecture. Not crude shelters or stacked field walls. They found T-shaped pillars carved from single blocks of limestone, standing up to 5.5 meters tall and weighing as much as 10 metric tons. The pillars are arranged in circles. Each enclosure contains 2 massive central pillars surrounded by a ring of smaller ones, all connected by low stone walls. The carvings on these pillars are sharp and detailed. Foxes, vultures, scorpions, wild boar, snakes, spiders, cranes with outstretched wings. Some of the animals are depicted in motion, frozen mid-stride or mid-strike. The craftsmanship required to produce these carvings with stone tools alone remains a subject of active study. Radiocarbon dating places the earliest construction phase at approximately 9,600 BCE. That is more than 11,000 years ago. At that time, according to the conventional archaeological timeline, humans in this region were hunter-gatherers. They lived in temporary camps, they followed animal herds, they foraged wild plants. They were not supposed to be capable of organized monumental construction. Yet here it stands, or more precisely, here it was buried. One of the most significant details about Göbekli Tepe is what is not there. Schmidt documented this extensively before his death in 2014. There are no hearths, no sleeping areas, no storage pits for grain, no middens filled with everyday waste. The site shows no evidence of permanent habitation. People came to this ridge, but they did not live on it. Lee Clare, the current project coordinator at the German Archaeological Institute, published analyses of the faunal remains found in the enclosures. The bones belong to wild aurochs, wild gazelle, wild boar, and other game animals. They show evidence of mass butchering and consumption on site. These were feasting events. Large groups of people traveled to this ridge, participated in communal rituals that involved enormous quantities of slaughtered animals, and then left. Göbekli Tepe was not a village, it was not a settlement, it was a destination, a place built for a single purpose, and that purpose was not daily survival. In 2003, the German Archaeological Institute began ground-penetrating radar surveys of the ridge. The results expanded every assumption about the scale of the site. The radar revealed at least 20 additional enclosures still buried beneath the surface. As of the most recent survey data, only 4 enclosures have been substantially excavated. That means roughly 95% of Göbekli Tepe remains underground. The structures already uncovered forced a rewrite of Neolithic history. What remains sealed beneath the ridge is a question that no living archaeologist can fully answer. Around 8000 BCE, after approximately 1,500 years of continuous use, the people who built and maintained Göbekli Tepe made a decision. They did not abandon the site. They did not let it fall into ruin. They filled it. Schmidt's excavation records describe the process in detail. Every enclosure was packed with limestone rubble, broken flint, animal bone fragments, and smaller carved stone objects. The fill was dense, deliberate, and systematic. It was not the result of natural collapse. It was not flood sediment. The stratigraphy shows clear human agency. Someone organized a labor force, gathered thousands of tons of rubble, and packed each enclosure from floor to ceiling. The pillars were not toppled or broken. They were entombed standing upright, exactly as they had been erected. In archaeology, deliberate burial is recognized as an act of preservation, not destruction. You bury what you want to protect from weather, from scavengers, from time. The dry limestone rubble created a stable, oxygen-poor environment that shielded the carved surfaces from erosion. It is the reason the animal reliefs on the pillars survive today in extraordinary detail after 12,000 years. Whoever organized this burial understood what exposure would do to carved stone. They chose to seal the site in a way that would keep it intact for as long as the stone itself lasted. This was not the act of people fleeing a disaster. This was planning. This was archival storage on a civilizational scale. The question that runs beneath every excavation report, every published analysis, every conference paper on Göbekli Tepe is the same. Why? Why would a society capable of building something this extraordinary choose to bury it? Why invest the same massive labor required for construction into concealment? What was so important about this place that it needed to be hidden rather than maintained? The archaeological record offers no answer. The enclosures were sealed, and the builders walked away into a gap in the record that lasts thousands of years. 5 things were sealed under that ridge. The first is the most immediately visible. The T-shaped pillars are not abstract forms. They are figures. Look closely at the largest pillars in enclosure D, and you can see arms carved in low relief along the narrow sides. The arms bend at the elbows. The hands reach forward across the flat front surface. The fingers meet at the navel. Some pillars wear carved belts. Some wear what appear to be fox pelt loincloths, with the animal tails hanging behind. They have shoulders. They have posture. But they have no faces, no eyes, no mouths, no features of any kind above the neckline. Klaus Schmidt interpreted these pillars as representations of beings, not purely human, not clearly divine, something between, something watching. They stand in circles, facing inward, oriented toward the center of each enclosure, as if observing something that once took place there. And they were buried that way, still standing, still facing inward, still watching in total darkness beneath tons of rubble for 12,000 years. The second thing sealed under Göbekli Tepe is the one that changes how you understand the entire site. The enclosures are circular or oval. They are partially subterranean, cut into the bedrock of the ridge. The walls are limestone. The floors are limestone. The geometry of these spaces is not random. Research conducted at comparable megalithic stone chambers around the world has measured a phenomenon called standing wave resonance. At the Hal Saflieni Hypogeum in Malta, a subterranean temple complex carved from limestone, researchers recorded resonant frequencies between 95 and 120 Hz. At Newgrange in Ireland, similar measurements were taken inside the passage chamber. These are infrasonic frequencies. They sit at the lowest threshold of human hearing. You do not hear them the way you hear a voice or a drum. You feel them. In your chest, in your skull, in the space behind your eyes. Dr. Ian Cook at the University of California, Los Angeles, published findings in the Journal of the Acoustical Society of America, showing that exposure to sound at 110 Hz produces a measurable shift in brain activity. Neural processing moves from the left temporal region, which handles language and analytical thought, to the right side, which governs spatial awareness, emotional experience, and holistic perception. At 110 Hz, your brain stops processing words and starts processing feeling. The geometry of Göbekli Tepe's enclosures, their diameter, their depth, their curved limestone walls, falls within the parameters that produce this resonance. Preliminary acoustic observations at the partially excavated chambers have noted resonant properties consistent with these findings. If a person stood inside enclosure D 12,000 years ago and struck the central pillar or chanted at a specific pitch, the chamber would have answered. The limestone walls would vibrate, the air would thicken and press against the body. The brain would shift out of its normal waking state into something older and deeper and harder to name. This is not metaphor. This is measurable physics. And when the enclosures were buried, this property was buried with them. The geometry was preserved. The proportions were kept intact inside the fill. Whatever frequency these chambers were shaped to hold, the architecture to produce it still exists in the unexcavated enclosures beneath the ridge. 20 or more sealed stone chambers, still shaped, still sized, still curved to resonate. 12,000 years of silence, and the stone still holds its shape. The third thing sealed there is carved into a single pillar that researchers now call the vulture stone. Pillar 43 stands in enclosure D. Its surface is covered with animal reliefs. A large vulture holds a circle in its wing. Below the vulture, a headless human figure, a scorpion. Other animal forms arranged across the stone in what appears to be deliberate placement. For years, scholars treated these carvings as decorative or symbolic. Then, in 2017, Martin Sweatman and Dimitrios Tsikritsis at the University of Edinburgh published a paper in the journal Mediterranean Archaeology and Archaeometry. Using precession-corrected star maps, they argued that the animal figures on Pillar 43 are not random. They represent constellations, and when mapped against the night sky, as it would have appeared from that latitude, they encode a specific date, approximately 10,950 BCE. That date falls within the window of the proposed Younger Dryas impact event. In 2007, Firestone, West and Kennett published research in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, proposing that a comet strike or airburst triggered a catastrophic cooling period roughly 12,800 years ago. The Younger Dryas lasted approximately 1,200 years. Global temperatures plunged. Megafauna populations collapsed across North America and possibly Eurasia. Nanodiamonds and melt glass consistent with extreme heat events have been found at dozens of sites across multiple continents. If Sweatman and Tsikritsis are correct, the carvings on Pillar 43 are not decoration. They are a date stamp, carved into limestone by people who survived something terrible and wanted the date preserved. The headless figure beneath the vulture represents death on a scale that warranted recording in stone and sealing underground where no weather could erase it. The fourth thing buried at Göbekli Tepe is not an object. It is the knowledge required to build the site itself. The pillars demonstrate quarrying techniques that involve identifying natural fracture planes in limestone bedrock and extracting multi-ton blocks with controlled precision. They demonstrate load-bearing calculations. The central pillars in enclosure D support their own weight without lateral bracing, which requires an understanding of center of gravity and material stress limits. The circular enclosure layouts show geometric planning. The acoustic properties suggest an understanding of how sound behaves inside curved stone spaces. The coordinated labor required to quarry, transport, carve, and erect. These pillars implies organizational structures, communication systems, and logistical planning that the conventional timeline does not account for at this date. This knowledge represents a technology package: stone selection, extraction angles, transport logistics across uneven terrain without draft animals, placement precision, acoustic geometry. And when Göbekli Tepe was sealed around 8000 BCE, this knowledge went underground with it. After the burial, no comparable megalithic construction appears anywhere in the archaeological record for thousands of years. The next structures approaching this scale and sophistication are the early megaliths of Western Europe and the first monumental buildings of southern Mesopotamia, all of them thousands of years later. Sealing Göbekli Tepe did not just hide a building, it removed a knowledge system from circulation. Whatever the builders understood about stone, sound, and sky was locked in the ground and stayed there. The fifth thing sealed beneath Göbekli Tepe is not visible in any excavation photograph. It is beneath the excavation itself. The ridge is limestone. Limestone is aquifer rock. It is porous. Water moves through it. Beneath Göbekli Tepe runs the same underground water system that feeds the springs of the Sanliurfa region. 15 kilometers to the southwest, in the city of Sanliurfa itself, there is a pool called Balikligol. It is fed by natural springs rising through the limestone. In Islamic tradition, this pool is associated with the Prophet Abraham. It has been considered sacred for millennia. The water beneath Göbekli Tepe and the water feeding those sacred pools is the same water moving through the same aquifer beneath the same geological formation. The site was built on top of underground fresh water. Every enclosure sits above this hidden water body. And in every Mesopotamian tradition that followed the era of Göbekli Tepe, underground fresh water was not just a resource. It was sacred. It had a name. The Sumerians called it the Abzu, the deep water, the hidden sea beneath the earth. And the Abzu belonged to one deity above all others. His name was Enki. In the oldest surviving Sumerian texts, translated by scholars including Samuel Noah Kramer and Thorkild Jacobson across decades of work at universities in Philadelphia and Chicago, Enki is the god of the Abzu, the god of underground fresh water, the god of wisdom, of crafts, of secret knowledge. His temple at Eridu, the oldest known Sumerian city, was called the Abzu, the house of the deep water. It was built over a natural freshwater spring in what is now southern Iraq, roughly 600 miles southeast of Göbekli Tepe. But Enki was not simply associated with water. He was the keeper of the Emi. The Emi were the divine decrees, not commandments carved in stone, something closer to blueprints, programs, packages of knowledge. The Emi contained everything that separates civilization from wilderness: agriculture, writing, law, medicine, metalwork, weaving, music, architecture, temple construction, the knowledge of how to build a world. According to the texts, Enki possessed all of them, and he did not share them freely. He sealed them in the Abzu. He locked them underground, beneath the water, in a sacred space that no other being could access. The myth of Enki and the world order, preserved on tablets catalogued as ETCSL 1.1.3, describes Enki traveling across lands, assigning functions, and depositing knowledge in hidden places. The Emi were buried, protected, archived in darkness and water beyond the reach of time. Now hold this pattern in your mind: a site older than any known civilization, built by people with knowledge that should not have existed at that date, constructed above underground fresh water, containing encoded astronomical records, acoustic engineering, construction techniques, and ritual architecture, deliberately sealed by its own builders and buried completely under tons of rubble, preserved intact in darkness for millennia. And then, roughly 5,000 years later, 600 miles to the southeast, a city rises over a freshwater spring. Its people build a temple there. They call it the House of the Deep Water. They write about a god who held all knowledge, all the blueprints of civilization, and sealed them underground beneath the water where no one could reach them. Eridu, the oldest Sumerian city, dates to approximately 5,400 BCE. That is roughly 2,600 years after Göbekli Tepe was buried. Its earliest temple layers sit directly over a freshwater aquifer. The temple was dedicated to Enki from its founding. The architectural concept, sacred structure over underground water containing sealed knowledge, appears at Eridu as if from nowhere, as if someone carried a memory south across generations and tried to rebuild what had been lost. As if the story of Enki and the Abzu and the buried Emi is not a myth invented from nothing but a memory of something real. Something built, something sealed, something still waiting under a limestone ridge in southeastern Turkey. Mainstream scholarship treats these parallels as coincidence. The Sumerian myths are read as theology. Göbekli Tepe is read as isolated archaeology. And perhaps that separation is correct. The evidence is published. The translations are available. The site coordinates are public. Nothing here is hidden or secret. What we make of it remains the only open question. The ridge is still there. The 4 excavated enclosures sit beneath a modern protective shelter. Tourists walk the platforms and photograph the fox and the vulture and the scorpion. Beneath their feet, 20 or more enclosures remain sealed in limestone rubble. The faceless pillars still standing in their circles, still facing inward. And beneath all of it, the water, moving through the aquifer, slow and old and blind. Whatever is down there is still down there.